The evening started with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. The protagonist had received the invitation weeks ago, and ever since then, they had been imagining every detail of the grand CEO party. The idea of performing at such an elite gathering was both thrilling and terrifying. They had practiced for months, perfecting every note, every pause, and every emotion that the music demanded. Still, doubts crept in as the day drew closer. When the protagonist arrived at the venue, the first thing that struck them was the sheer elegance of the place. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors. The air was filled with the murmur of conversations, laughter, and the occasional clinking of glasses. Everyone seemed so confident, so polished, and so at ease. The protagonist felt a twinge of self-consciousness. Their outfit, chosen carefully to look sophisticated yet not flashy, suddenly felt inadequate amidst the sea of designer dresses, tailored suits, and sparkling jewelry. As they stepped inside, they immediately noticed a group of guests who seemed to be scrutinizing them. Their whispers carried just enough to be noticeable, and some even let out quiet chuckles. It was subtle, almost casual, but enough to make the protagonist's stomach tighten. They tried to shake off the discomfort, reminding themselves why they were there. The music, their skill, and the anticipation of showing their talent were more important than these fleeting judgments. Walking further into the room, the protagonist took in the environment. There were tables with elegant floral arrangements, trays of delicately arranged hors d'oeuvres, and waiters moving gracefully through the crowd, balancing plates and glasses with effortless precision. The hum of conversation created a lively backdrop, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional clinking of a champagne flute. Despite the beauty and sophistication, the protagonist couldn't ignore the occasional glance that felt like a judgment, a silent evaluation of who they were and whether they belonged here. They found a quiet corner near the piano, the instrument that would soon carry them from nerves to confidence. The piano gleamed under the soft lighting, and the polished surface reflected the room and its inhabitants. The protagonist ran their fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar grooves and textures that had become a second language through countless hours of practice. The comfort of the instrument provided a small but significant sense of calm, a reminder that this was their domain, where talent and dedication could speak louder than appearances or whispers. Minutes passed, and more guests began to notice the protagonist. Some offered polite nods or smiles, acknowledging their presence, while others seemed more curious, perhaps wondering what someone like them could bring to such a gathering. The protagonist felt the weight of expectations from all directions. They had been invited to perform, yes, but in a room filled with high-powered executives, influential people, and social elites, performing was not just about music. It was about presence, poise, and the subtle art of commanding attention without saying a word. As the evening progressed, the protagonist tried to engage in small talk with a few attendees who seemed approachable. Conversations were polite but brief, revolving around safe topics like the city, recent events, and the general excitement of the party. Yet, every now and then, there was a fleeting moment where a comment or a look hinted at mockery. Some seemed amused by their nervous energy or the way they carried themselves. The protagonist felt a sting each time, but they reminded themselves that this was temporary. They had come to perform, not to fit in perfectly with the crowd. The tension was palpable as the host made a subtle announcement, signaling that performances would soon begin. The protagonist felt their heart race, a mix of anticipation and anxiety. They found themselves taking deep breaths, trying to steady their nerves. Every step toward the piano felt like moving closer to a challenge they were both eager and hesitant to face. They could hear the murmurs around them, the clinking of glasses, and the shuffle of guests finding their places to watch. In that moment, everything else faded, and all that mattered was the music waiting to flow from their fingers. Sitting at the piano, the protagonist adjusted the bench and placed their hands on the keys. The coolness of the ivory was grounding, a tactile reminder of countless hours of preparation. Their mind wandered briefly, recalling late nights of practice, moments of doubt, and small victories that had led them here. The audience, with all its sophistication and occasional mockery, was just another part of the performance. The true test was within, the ability to transform fear into expression and hesitation into artistry. As they began to play, the first notes filled the room, delicate and tentative at first. The protagonist allowed the music to flow naturally, letting every chord, every pause, every crescendo tell the story they had practiced so many times. Slowly, the tension in their body eased. They could sense the attention of the room shifting, the subtle curiosity turning into engagement. Even those who had whispered or laughed earlier seemed drawn to the sound, unable to resist the emotion conveyed through each key. In that moment, the protagonist realized that their initial discomfort and the whispers of mockery had no power over the music. The piano did not judge. It responded to honesty, passion, and skill. The room, filled with influential figures and social elites, was now held in the quiet grip of anticipation, waiting for the next note, the next phrase, the next expression of the performer's talent. The protagonist felt a sense of liberation, a recognition that their preparation, their dedication, and their courage were what truly mattered. The opening section of the piece came to a gentle close, and the protagonist took a brief pause. There was a soft silence in the room, almost reverent, broken only by a faint clinking of a glass somewhere in the background. The initial mockery, the doubtful glances, the whispering, all of it seemed to dissolve, replaced by the shared experience of music. The protagonist felt a small but powerful surge of confidence, a quiet acknowledgement that they were exactly where they were meant to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. As the first part of the evening drew to a close, the protagonist knew that the Real challenge was still ahead. The room was full of people whose opinions could feel overwhelming, yet they had already taken the first step toward silencing doubt with action. The piano had become a bridge between fear and expression, a tool that allowed the protagonist to assert presence without confrontation, to communicate without words, and to command attention without arrogance. The evening continued with soft chatter and polite applause from earlier performances, but the protagonist's focus remained on the piano. Each note played, each chord struck, reinforced the understanding that resilience and preparation could transform even the most intimidating environment into an opportunity. The initial ridicule, though painful, had inadvertently prepared them for this moment, sharpening focus, heightening awareness, and igniting determination. As part one of the evening concluded in the protagonist's mind, they felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The journey from awkward arrival to poised preparation had been emotionally taxing but ultimately empowering. They knew that the upcoming performance would demand even more courage, skill, and emotional honesty. Yet, they were ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that their talent, dedication, and integrity were far more influential than any whispered judgment or fleeting mockery. The protagonist remained seated at the piano, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night, yet embracing the promise of transformation. The stage was set, the audience attentive, and the music waiting. What had begun as a nerve-wracking entrance, marked by whispers and subtle mockery, was now evolving into a moment of personal triumph, the first step toward a performance that could silence doubt, captivate hearts, and affirm the value of perseverance and passion. This was the beginning of a story that would be remembered not for the ridicule faced, but for the courage shown, the talent revealed, and the quiet strength that had carried them to this defining moment. The moment before the protagonist began their piano performance was charged with tension. The soft hum of conversation around the room seemed louder now, almost magnified by the nervous anticipation that coursed through their body. Every glance from the guests felt like a magnifying lens on their insecurities. The whispers, once distant, now felt like they were circling, pointing out flaws and weaknesses that may or may not exist. Despite this, the protagonist took a deep breath, grounding themselves in the knowledge that this performance was about more than appearances. It was about the music, about their own expression, and about proving to themselves that fear would not control the moment. Before starting, they allowed themselves a brief moment to observe the audience. The room was full of high-powered individuals, people who had built empires, influenced industries, and commanded respect. Among them, a few faces were unmistakably judgmental. Their smirks and subtle laughter had not gone unnoticed earlier, and the protagonist could feel the sting of it again. It was a test not only of skill but of resilience. Would they crumble under the scrutiny or rise above it? The answer would come through the music, through each note and each phrase they played. When their fingers finally touched the keys, the sound was soft, tentative at first, like a whisper trying to find its place in a noisy world. The initial measures were about finding rhythm, confidence, and a connection between thought and action. The protagonist felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as the music began to take over, a comforting presence that allowed them to focus on the performance rather than the eyes watching. Slowly, the music grew, carrying with it a confidence that had been simmering beneath the surface. As the performance continued, the audience began to notice. Conversations quieted, glances turned toward the piano, and the occasional raised eyebrow signaled curiosity. The protagonist could feel the subtle shift in energy. Those who had mocked or whispered before were now leaning in slightly, their expressions changing from amusement to intrigue. It was not immediate transformation, but a subtle acknowledgement that something compelling was unfolding. The protagonist felt a small surge of hope mixed with relief. The power of music was beginning to work its magic. With each phrase, the protagonist allowed themselves to pour in emotion, letting the music carry personal stories of struggle, resilience, and determination. The room responded in silence, the kind that is heavier than words and more telling than applause. Every chord became a statement, a quiet declaration of presence. The earlier ridicule, though painful, seemed to dissolve under the honesty of the performance. The protagonist realized that this moment was not about proving anyone wrong with words or confrontation. It was about showing what could not be ignored: talent, heart, and courage. Halfway through the piece, a sense of rhythm and flow emerged. The protagonist's nerves, though still present, had transformed into a focused energy that drove every movement of their hands. Each note carried weight and meaning, each pause a deliberate expression of thought and emotion. The guests who had once snickered were now still, their attention caught and held by the beauty and intensity of the music. Some seemed moved, leaning forward unconsciously, caught in the narrative being told through sound. The protagonist remembered all the nights of practice, the moments of doubt, the small victories, and the relentless determination to improve. Every late night spent perfecting technique, every sacrifice made, had led to this moment. Now, the validation was not in applause but in the silence, the attention, and the undeniable connection that had been established with the audience. This was more powerful than words. It was recognition that transcended judgment, beyond the limitations of social hierarchies or whispered criticisms. As the piece reached its most intricate section, the protagonist felt both physical and emotional exertion. The complexity of the music demanded precision, focus, and emotional investment all at once. Fingers moved quickly yet deliberately, each chord placed with intention, each transition executed with care. The challenge was intense, yet exhilarating. They could feel the energy of the room, the subtle shifts in breathing and posture of the listeners, as the audience became part of the music itself, responding without saying a word. The connection was electric, invisible yet tangible. A few guests who had earlier exchanged smirks now wore expressions of admiration, their previous mockery replaced by an almost unspoken acknowledgement. The protagonist felt a quiet satisfaction, not of revenge, but of triumph in its purest form. The music had spoken where words could not. It had silenced judgment and replaced it with respect and wonder. The protagonist understood that this was the ultimate form of validation. Not proving anyone wrong, but revealing truth and skill in a way that could not be denied. As the final passages approached, the music swelled with emotion. The protagonist's body seemed to move on its own, guided by the rhythm and melody, by the culmination of preparation and passion. The room, once filled with chatter and judgment, was now fully immersed in the performance. The air felt heavier with anticipation, yet lighter with appreciation. Every note carried weight and significance, every phrase a testament to perseverance, courage, and dedication. When the last note finally faded, there was a moment of stillness. The audience seemed suspended, caught between awe and reflection. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began, tentative at first, then building into genuine admiration. The protagonist sat back, allowing themselves a moment to breathe, to feel the satisfaction that comes not from the loudest voices, but from the acknowledgement of truth and talent. The journey from ridicule to recognition, from nervousness to command, had been challenging, but it was theirs, and theirs alone. As the applause continued, some guests approached with compliments, their smiles genuine, their eyes reflecting respect. The ones who had whispered or mocked earlier now nodded or offered quiet congratulations. It was not about humiliation or revenge, but about transformation, the transformation of perception, of energy, and most importantly, of self-belief. The protagonist felt a quiet pride, an internal acknowledgement that skill, courage, and authenticity had prevailed. The rest of the evening continued, but for the protagonist, the performance had shifted the entire atmosphere. Confidence replaced anxiety, and every interaction afterward felt less intimidating. The whispers that had once caused doubt now felt insignificant, mere echoes against the backdrop of a personal triumph. The power of facing judgment, embracing vulnerability, and letting passion shine had proven itself in the most tangible way possible. By the end of the night, the protagonist realized that this experience had taught a vital lesson. That ridicule, though hurtful, could be transformed into motivation. The true measure of strength was not in avoiding judgment, but in using it to fuel preparation, dedication, and performance. The piano had been the instrument of that transformation, the medium through which fear became expression, and doubt became triumph. As they finally left the piano and stepped away from the audience, the protagonist felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The ridicule that had initially caused anxiety was now a distant memory, replaced by the knowledge that talent, perseverance, and emotional honesty could command attention in ways that no mocking word ever could. The night had begun with whispers and judgment, but it had become a story of courage, resilience, and the undeniable power of art to bridge divides, silence critics, and reveal the depth of human potential. The music had taken control of the room, and the protagonist felt a deep connection to each note, each chord, each pause. The earlier nervousness had transformed into a focused determination. Their fingers moved with precision, yet there was a fluidity that came only from passion and long hours of practice. Every movement was deliberate, every note intentional, as the music became a bridge between the performer and the audience. The guests, once skeptical and dismissive, were now captivated. The subtle smirks and whispered remarks had faded into a silence filled with anticipation and curiosity. It was as if the room collectively held its breath, waiting to see where the performance would lead next. The protagonist could sense their attention, could feel their presence as a living, breathing audience, fully engaged in the unfolding story of sound. Each section of the piece demanded both technical skill and emotional depth. The protagonist played not just with fingers but with heart, allowing personal experiences, struggles, and triumphs to seep into the music. The notes became a language of expression, conveying feelings that words could not capture. They remembered moments of doubt, moments of ridicule, and the long hours of preparation that had brought them here. Now, those experiences were transformed into power, precision, and artistry. As the tempo increased, the protagonist allowed the music to soar, filling the room with energy and emotion. The once judgmental faces in the audience now reflected admiration and respect. Some leaned forward, completely engrossed in the performance, as though each note was a story being told directly to them. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, carried away by the intensity and beauty of the performance. The protagonist felt a surge of confidence. This was more than just a performance. It was a statement. The ridicule they had faced upon arrival had been replaced by awe, the doubts replaced by undeniable presence. The music became a shield and a sword at the same time, protecting them from insecurity while asserting their skill and authenticity. Every note reinforced the message. Talent and dedication could silence even the harshest critics. In the middle of the piece, the protagonist hit a complex sequence of chords, demanding full concentration and precise coordination. They could feel the weight of expectation pressing on them, but it was different now. Instead of fear, it was motivation. The audience was fully engaged, and the protagonist fed off that energy. The earlier whispers of mockery seemed like a distant memory, insignificant against the impact of the music. The piece flowed seamlessly from one section to the next, each transition smooth yet dramatic. The audience reacted subtly, some leaning in, some nodding their heads in appreciation, some exchanging glances that silently communicated surprise and admiration. The protagonist allowed themselves a small smile, not from arrogance, but from the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had captured attention and respect through their artistry. The emotional intensity increased as the music reached its climax. The protagonist's hands moved faster, yet with precision, every chord striking with clarity and intent. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm, the energy shared between performer and audience becoming almost tangible. Even the most critical guests appeared to be caught in the spell of the performance, their earlier amusement replaced by a newfound reverence. As the piece neared its conclusion, the protagonist focused on the final passages, where subtlety and expression were as important as technical skill. They allowed the music to breathe, to linger, to express the unspoken. Each note was a reflection of the journey that had brought them to this moment, from the nervous arrival, through ridicule and doubt, to a place of quiet triumph and authenticity. The audience was fully immersed, responding not with words but with attention and emotion. The last note lingered in the air, a delicate echo that seemed to suspend time for a moment. The room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then gradually, a ripple of applause began. It was soft at first, then grew steadily, building into genuine appreciation. The protagonist sat back, hands still hovering above the keys, absorbing the moment. The music had done what words could not. It had transformed judgment into respect, ridicule into acknowledgement, and nerves into empowerment. The guests approached the piano, some with smiles, some with quiet nods, and a few with expressions of awe. Compliments were exchanged, polite and sincere, but the impact of the performance was more than any words could convey. The protagonist felt a sense of fulfillment and pride, not from the approval of others, but from the realization that they had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and allowed their talent to shine. The host of the event came over, offering congratulations and a warm handshake. The acknowledgement was significant, a recognition of skill and courage in front of influential people. The protagonist felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the journey had been worthwhile. The earlier ridicule had been a challenge, but the performance had proven that resilience, preparation, and authenticity could overcome even the harshest doubts. As the protagonist stepped away from the piano, they noticed the change in the atmosphere. The room that had once been filled with whispers and judgment now held a sense of respect and admiration. The audience's attention had shifted from superficial impressions to genuine appreciation of talent and emotion. It was a powerful lesson. True skill and authenticity could command recognition, even in the most intimidating settings. Reflecting on the experience, the protagonist realized that the ridicule they had faced was not a measure of their worth, but a test of their resilience. The ability to transform fear into focus, doubt into determination, and vulnerability into expression had made the performance unforgettable. Every note played was a testament to the strength of preparation, the courage to face judgment, and the power of honest expression. By the end of the performance, the protagonist felt a profound sense of achievement. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a medium of transformation, a conduit for personal growth and validation. The applause, the nods of approval, and the silent respect of the audience were affirmations not just of musical skill, but of the courage and perseverance that had made the performance possible. The evening continued, but for the protagonist, the moment at the piano was a turning point. The journey from ridicule to recognition, from anxiety to confidence, had been completed in a single powerful performance. The lessons learned were clear. True talent, combined with preparation and courage, could overcome doubt, silence critics, and command respect. The protagonist left the piano with a sense of quiet triumph, ready to face the rest of the night and carry the confidence gained into future challenges. The applause that followed the protagonist's performance was more than a reaction. It was a recognition of courage, skill, and the ability to transform a room. The guests who had once whispered and smirked now looked on with respect and genuine admiration. The protagonist remained seated at the piano for a moment, absorbing the shift in energy, letting the impact of their performance settle in. There was a quiet power in seeing the room transformed, in witnessing judgment replaced by appreciation. As the clapping continued, the protagonists allowed themselves a small, private smile. It wasn't arrogance, but a recognition that they had faced fear head-on and emerged with confidence intact. The music had done what words could not. It had spoken directly to the hearts of the audience, bypassing superficial judgments and reaching something deeper. For the first time that evening, the protagonist felt fully present, fully in command of their talent, and fully validated. Guests began to approach, some cautiously, some with obvious admiration. A few who had mocked them earlier now extended hands in greeting, their expressions sincere. Compliments were exchanged, some warm and personal, others polite but meaningful. Each acknowledgement reinforced the protagonist's understanding that skill and passion could create a lasting impression, regardless of initial impressions or doubts. It was a powerful lesson in resilience and self-belief. The host of the event made their way over, offering congratulations and praise for the performance. The acknowledgement carried weight, coming from someone who had influence and respect within the room. The protagonist felt a surge of pride, tempered by humility, as they realized that their hard work and dedication had not gone unnoticed. The experience had been transformative, and the recognition they received was a confirmation of the value of perseverance. As the evening continued, the protagonists found themselves engaged in conversations that were previously intimidating. Guests asked questions about the music, the inspiration behind the performance, and the journey that had led them here. Each question was an opportunity to share a part of themselves, to connect authentically with people who had once seemed untouchable or intimidating. The protagonist realized that the music had opened doors, creating spaces for genuine connection and understanding. Reflecting on the night, the protagonist recognized the contrast between the ridicule upon arrival and the admiration now shown. It had not been easy to face whispers, smirks, and judgment, but the choice to respond through action rather than confrontation had made all the difference. The piano had become a vehicle for transformation, allowing the protagonist to communicate strength, talent, and authenticity in a way that could not be ignored. The power of music, when combined with courage and preparation, had silenced doubt and criticism. The protagonist also noticed subtle changes in the behavior of some guests. Those who had been dismissive or judgmental seemed to reassess their initial impressions, engaging in conversation with curiosity rather than condescension. It was a reminder that first judgments, however sharp, could be altered by demonstration of skill, confidence, and sincerity. The performance had shifted perceptions, replacing ridicule with respect and skepticism with admiration. In the quieter moments between interactions, the protagonists allowed themselves to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. Weeks of preparation, countless hours of practice, and the decision to face fear rather than avoid it had culminated in this moment. The nerves, the anxiety, and even the initial humiliation had been necessary components of growth, shaping a performance that was both technically impressive and emotionally compelling. The protagonist felt gratitude for the challenges, understanding that they had been opportunities in disguise. As the night progressed, more guests came forward, sharing their experiences with music, their own stories of overcoming doubt, and their appreciation for the authenticity of the performance. The protagonist listened, engaged, and shared insights, finding a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. The atmosphere had shifted from one of subtle judgment to one of curiosity, appreciation, and genuine engagement. The music had done more than entertain. It had built connections and fostered understanding. At a quiet moment, the protagonist stepped away from the piano, observing the room from a distance. They could see groups of people engaged in conversation, some referencing the performance, some reflecting on the impact it had made. There was a sense of energy and warmth that had not been present upon arrival. The protagonist felt a quiet pride, knowing that their presence, skill, and courage had contributed to this change. It was a validation not just of talent but of character. The host, seeing the protagonist observing the room, approached with a final gesture of recognition. A handshake, a warm word, a subtle nod, all small but significant signs of respect. The protagonist understood that the performance had transcended the music itself. It had demonstrated resilience, presence, and authenticity in a way that left a lasting impression. The ridicule from earlier seemed a distant memory, replaced by acknowledgement of capability and strength. Throughout the rest of the evening, the protagonist moved with a sense of ease that had been absent at the start. Conversations flowed more naturally, smiles felt more genuine, and the presence of those who had once seemed intimidating was no longer a source of fear. The performance had created a shift, not just in the audience, but within the protagonist as well. Confidence, previously tentative, was now solidified through action and experience. Reflecting on the night, the protagonist realized that the experience was not solely about receiving recognition, but about discovering inner strength. The journey from ridicule to admiration had been shaped by courage, preparation, and the willingness to express oneself fully. The piano had been the medium, but the true achievement was in the ability to face fear, embrace vulnerability, and demonstrate authenticity in the face of judgment. As the evening came to a close, the protagonist felt a sense of completion and fulfillment. The journey had begun with nervous anticipation, passed through ridicule and doubt, and culminated in recognition, connection, and personal triumph. The applause, the conversations, and the respect shown were tangible outcomes, but the deeper lesson was internal. Resilience, courage, and authenticity could create impact beyond expectation. The protagonist left the piano area with a quiet sense of victory, understanding that the experience had transformed not just the room, but themselves. The power of action over words, talent over ridicule, and presence over fear had been demonstrated fully. The evening was more than an event. It was a lesson in human strength, an affirmation of the ability to turn judgment into motivation, and a reminder that true expression resonates when delivered with courage and sincerity. By the end of Part 4, the protagonist had not only silenced critics but had also built respect, forged connections, and solidified confidence that would carry far beyond the evening. The transformation from doubt to acknowledgement was complete, leaving a lasting impression both on the audience and within themselves. The piano had been the instrument of change, but the courage to perform, the dedication to skill, and the authenticity of expression were the true keys to triumph. The final moments of the evening carried a different energy, one that the protagonist could feel in every step, every glance, and every interaction. The performance had transformed the room, leaving an atmosphere of respect, admiration, and genuine curiosity. The protagonist, having faced ridicule and nervous anticipation earlier, now walked with a quiet confidence that came from experience, skill, and resilience. There was a sense of completion, a feeling that a journey had been navigated successfully, and a recognition that the impact extended beyond the performance itself. As guests mingled, many approached the protagonist to express sincere appreciation. Some shared their personal experiences with music, revealing how the performance had moved them, inspired reflection, or rekindled their own memories. Others complimented the technical mastery, the emotion conveyed, and the courage displayed. Each interaction reinforced the idea that true talent and authenticity could transcend initial impressions, transform judgment into admiration, and leave a lasting mark. The protagonist listened, engaged, and responded with gratitude, feeling a connection that had been impossible before the performance. In the quieter moments, the protagonist reflected on the journey that had led them here. Weeks, months, and even years of dedication had culminated in this moment. Each practice session, every late night, the moments of doubt and frustration had been building blocks for this achievement. The ridicule faced upon arrival had been painful, yet it became a catalyst, a motivator to focus, prepare, and ultimately triumph. The music was more than notes and chords. It was a story of perseverance, courage, and self-expression. The host approached, offering congratulations and sharing observations about the impact of the performance. The acknowledgement carried a weight that went beyond politeness, signaling recognition from someone with authority and influence. The protagonist felt a deep sense of satisfaction, understanding that the performance had not only entertained, but had also left an impression of integrity, talent, and strength. It was a reminder that the most important validation comes from action, preparation, and the courage to present oneself fully. Throughout the rest of the evening, the protagonist moved among the guests with ease, engaging in conversations that had previously felt intimidating. Questions about music, inspiration, and personal experiences provided opportunities to connect authentically. The atmosphere, once filled with judgment and whispers, was now one of engagement, curiosity, and respect. Each interaction was a testament to the power of perseverance, skill, and courage, reinforcing that presence and authenticity can reshape perceptions. The protagonist noticed subtle changes in the demeanor of some guests. Those who had once been dismissive or critical now showed genuine interest, engaging in dialogue and expressing admiration. The transformation was not about winning favor, but about demonstrating that skill, dedication, and honesty can overcome skepticism and prejudice. The music had been a catalyst, but the protagonist's courage, preparation, and authenticity had solidified the change. Moments of reflection allowed the protagonist to understand the deeper lessons of the evening. Ridicule, while uncomfortable, had provided an opportunity to demonstrate resilience. Anxiety and self-doubt had become fuel for focus, and the performance had turned vulnerability into strength. The piano had been the instrument, but the true achievement was the demonstration of courage, persistence, and the ability to connect with others through authenticity and skill. The experience was a reminder that challenges, when met with determination, can lead to growth and transformation. As the night drew toward its conclusion, the protagonist observed the guests interacting, reflecting on the shared experience. Conversations referenced the performance, and the respect shown was evident in gestures, tone, and attention. The protagonist felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that the journey from ridicule to recognition had been completed not through confrontation, but through mastery, expression, and presence. The lessons learned were profound. Preparation, courage, and authenticity have the power to transform perception and create meaningful connections. At a final gathering of key guests, the protagonist was acknowledged once more, this time in a more formal capacity. Compliments were offered, and respect was communicated not just in words, but in posture, attention, and engagement. The protagonist realized that the performance had served as more than entertainment. It had demonstrated personal strength, emotional honesty, and the ability to leave a lasting impression. The transformation of the room mirrored the internal transformation, a shift from self-doubt to confidence, from ridicule to recognition. The protagonist's reflections continued as they prepared to leave the event. They recognized that the night had been about more than a single performance. It had been a lesson in resilience, courage, and authenticity. The ridicule and whispers had tested them, but the choice to respond with skill, presence, and honesty had created impact. The piano had been a medium, but the real triumph lay in the ability to face fear, embrace vulnerability, and communicate truthfully through action. Walking away from the piano, the protagonist felt a sense of closure and accomplishment. The applause, the conversations, and the subtle acknowledgments of respect were meaningful, but the deeper satisfaction came from the understanding that they had transformed the initial challenge into an opportunity. The journey from nervous arrival, through ridicule, to triumphant recognition, was complete. The protagonist had proven not only to the audience but also to themselves that talent, preparation, and courage can create undeniable influence. The final moments of the evening were quiet but significant. Guests were preparing to depart, sharing final words and gestures of appreciation. The protagonist moved through the room with confidence, acknowledging compliments and expressing gratitude. Each interaction reinforced the understanding that true impact comes from authenticity, dedication, and the courage to face challenges. The evening had been a microcosm of life's lessons. Challenges test resilience, but skill and courage can transform perception and build lasting respect. Reflecting once more, the protagonist realized the full arc of the experience. What began with ridicule had evolved into acknowledgement, connection, and personal triumph. The performance had silenced critics, captivated hearts, and established a presence that could not be ignored. The journey was a testament to the power of preparation, emotional honesty, and the ability to rise above judgment. It was a lesson in the transformative potential of courage and talent. As the event came to a close, the protagonist stepped outside, feeling the cool night air as a gentle contrast to the warmth and energy of the gathering. The night had been long, challenging, and emotionally taxing, but it had also been profoundly rewarding. The protagonist carried with them not only the memory of a successful performance, but also a renewed understanding of their own strength, capability, and resilience. The experience had reaffirmed that facing fear, embracing vulnerability, and committing fully to one's craft can create powerful outcomes. In the quiet of the night, the protagonist reflected on the lasting impact of the evening. The ridicule that had once caused anxiety now seemed insignificant, a distant memory overshadowed by achievement, recognition, and personal growth. The experience had demonstrated that challenges, when met with skill, courage, and authenticity, can become opportunities for transformation. The piano had been the catalyst, but the true success lay in the demonstration of human resilience, presence, and the ability to communicate through action. The protagonist left the venue with a sense of fulfillment that extended beyond personal accomplishment. The night had not only been about a performance, but about demonstrating the power of perseverance, preparation, and emotional honesty. The lessons learned, the respect earned, and the confidence gained would carry forward, shaping future endeavors and interactions. The journey from ridicule to recognition had been completed, leaving the protagonist with a profound understanding of the strength found in courage, skill, and authenticity. As the evening ended, the protagonist felt an enduring sense of pride and accomplishment. The story of the night would remain with them, a reminder that true impact comes from preparation, passion, and the willingness to face challenges with courage. Ridicule, doubt, and judgment are temporary, but skill, authenticity, and presence leave lasting impressions. The piano had spoken, the audience had listened, and the protagonist had emerged transformed, both by the performance and by the journey itself.